Before Washington, before Selma, Martin Luther King Jr. was already speaking in Kentucky. Today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I wanted to take a few minutes to explore Dr. King's ties to Kentucky because they're deeper and more consequential than I certainly realized before today. In 1957, a 28-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the commencement address at Kentucky State University in Frankfort, a traditionally black university. He was already nationally known for leading the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and the crowd was so large in Frankfort that the ceremony had to be moved to a nearby high school gym just to fit everyone who wanted to speak, everyone who wanted to hear him speak in. But that visit to Kentucky wasn't a one-off. In 1964, King returned to Kentucky alongside baseball legend Jackie Robinson and Kentucky State Senator Georgia Davis Powers, and on March 5th, they joined more than 10,000 Kentuckians for the March on Frankfort, pressing lawmakers for a state public accommodations bill and broader civil rights protections. 2 years later, Governor Edward T. Breathitt signed the Kentucky Civil Rights Act into law. Louisville also became central to King's Kentucky story in the mid-1960s through his brother, A.D. King. A.D. King moved to Louisville in 1965 to serve as pastor at Zion Baptist Church and emerged as a leader in the city's open housing movement. During those years, Martin Luther King Jr. visited Louisville multiple times to support his brother and the growing fight against housing discrimination. The open housing movement focused on one specific issue: where black families were allowed to live. In Louisville, housing segregation was enforced not just by custom, but by policy. Landlords could legally refuse to rent to black residents. Neighborhoods were effectively closed off by race. Open housing laws aimed to make that discrimination illegal, allowing people to live where they could afford and choose, not just where they were confined. It was one of the most contested civil rights battles in the city because it challenged segregation block by block and street by street. In March 1967, King spoke at the University of Louisville's Brandeis School of Law, where an overflow crowd gathered to hear him address that open housing fight. In that same spring, Louisville saw sustained demonstrations. Protesters were arrested, marchers were attacked. Derby Week tensions escalated to a point where a large-scale protest at Churchill Downs was openly discussed and considered. King ultimately called off a Derby Day demonstration, though, warning that predicting a race riot could help bring one into existence. But later that year, Louisville passed an open housing ordinance. King's influence in Louisville also lived on through local leaders. Raoul Cunningham, a Louisville native and longtime civil rights organizer, first heard King speak when he was a student at Male High School. He later worked for him and alongside of him and helped bring him back to the city for a voter registration drive in 1967. Cunningham would go on to lead Louisville's NAACP chapter for decades, citing King as a defining influence. And King's final visit to Louisville came in 1967. Less than a year later, he was assassinated in Memphis. This is relevant, not just because of the speeches everyone remembers, but the act of marching itself. Showing up, being visible, forcing issues into the open when the people in power would rather wait it out. The specifics change over time, but the core questions do not. Who gets pushed aside? Who gets shut out? Who's allowed to fully participate in society? King knew progress doesn't happen quietly or automatically. It happens when people step into public spaces together and make it impossible to look away. So if you're honoring him today, it's worth remembering that King's legacy isn't simply just national. In Kentucky, it's local, and it's still visible if you know where to look.